At 12 years old, Riley Curry took the stage at her school to give a simple speech about Mother's Day. But what no one expected was for her to stop in the middle of her talk and begin to cry. For the first time, she revealed what she truly feels about growing up in the spotlight and about her own mother. Her words caught everyone by surprise, including Ayesha, who watched emotionally from the audience. What Riley said in that moment became impossible to ignore and changed everything. Between them, the California sun streamed through the tall windows of the Bay Area Preparatory School auditorium, illuminating the stage where 12-year-old Riley Curry adjusted the microphone. Her honey-colored eyes scanned the rows of still empty chairs. In a few hours, the venue would be filled with families for the Mother's Day celebration. Testing. 1, 2, 3, she murmured, feeling her heart beat faster. Since she was little, Riley never had problems with public attention. At 2 years old, she already stole the scene during her father's post-basketball game interviews. But today was different. Ms. Bennett, the literature teacher, approached with a gentle smile. "How are you feeling, Riley? Nervous?" Riley forced a smile. "A little, but it'll be fine. Your speech is wonderful. You have a natural gift for writing." "Thank you." Riley squeezed the folded paper in her pocket. What the teacher didn't know was that this was no longer the speech she had reviewed 3 days earlier. In the makeshift dressing room at the back of the auditorium, Riley checked her phone. A message from her mother. "We're leaving home now. Your dad made it back from his trip in time. We're so proud of you." She quickly typed, "Thank you, Mom. Love you." 3 simple words that couldn't express the whirlwind in her chest. Riley put her phone away and took the crumpled paper with her real notes from her pocket. Words scribbled at 3 in the morning, when everyone was asleep. Words she had never said aloud. "5 minutes until we start the final rehearsal," called Ms. Bennett from the hallway. Riley looked at herself in the small mirror. Her curly hair framed her face that increasingly resembled her mother's. She took a deep breath. It was just a school speech. Why did it feel like she was about to jump off a cliff? Her phone vibrated again. A message from Jordan, her best friend. "Don't forget you promised not to cry today. See you soon." Riley smiled slightly, remembering the promise made the previous week. "I'll talk about my mom without melting into tears like a child," she had said, trying to sound mature and composed. That promise now seemed impossible to keep. Because what Riley planned to say wasn't just a formal thank you or a rehearsed tribute. It was the truth she had kept for years about Ayesha Curry, not the famous chef, not the basketball player's wife, but the mother few truly knew. "Riley, we're ready," Ms. Bennett's voice interrupted her thoughts. She tucked the paper back into her pocket and headed to the stage. The rehearsal would be smooth. No emotion, revealing nothing. She would save everything for the real moment. 3 hours later, the auditorium was packed. In the front rows, Riley could see her family. Her father, Steph, as tall and imposing as in games, but today with a gentle expression. Her 9-year-old sister, Ryan, fidgeting in her chair. Her 6-year-old brother, Cannon, playing with the event program. And her mother, Ayesha, radiant in a navy blue dress, with no idea what was coming. Principal Peterson took the stage for the welcome. "Today we celebrate the extraordinary mothers who shape our lives." Riley took a deep breath. Time seemed to drag. Several presentations followed. Poems, songs, short videos made by younger children. Finally, and now representing 6th grade, Riley Curry with her speech, "Beyond the Cameras, My Mother." Polite applause filled the auditorium as Riley climbed the steps to the stage. Under the lights, she adjusted the microphone. Her eyes met her mother's. Ayesha smiled, that comforting smile that always said, "I'm here. You can do this." Riley unfolded her paper, not the rehearsed one, but the one written in the early hours. She looked at the first words, and then, unexpectedly, folded it back. "Good afternoon, everyone." Her voice sounded firm through the microphone. "I prepared a speech about my mother, Ayesha Curry. It talked about how she balances being a chef, aka businesswoman, and a mother of 3 children." Riley paused, feeling her heart race. "But that's not what I want to talk about today." In the front row, Ayesha leaned slightly forward, her expression changing from pride to gentle concern. "I want to talk about something I've never said before, not even to her. My first memory has a smell," Riley continued, her voice echoing through the silent auditorium. "Cinnamon and orange. I was maybe 3 years old, and I woke up too early. The house was dark and quiet." In the audience, Ayesha tilted her head slightly, recognizing a memory she never knew her daughter had kept. "I found my mother in the kitchen, still in her pajamas. She didn't notice I was there, hidden behind the door. She was making cinnamon and orange muffins, the recipe that's now in her cookbook. But back then, it was just a recipe she was testing." Riley closed her eyes for a moment, reliving the scene. She worked silently, measuring ingredients, tasting the batter. And she was humming. A melody she only sang when she thought she was alone. I stood there, watching, because I realized I was seeing something rare. My mother being just herself, with no one watching. Ayesha brought her hand to her lips, her eyes watery. It was the first time I understood that my mother was a person beyond being my mother, and I started to observe her. Always. Riley's mind went back to a winter Sunday when she was 5 years old. It was raining in Oakland, and the family was supposed to go to a Warriors game. Her father had already left, and Ayesha was preparing to take the girls. "Mommy, I can't find Mr. Rabbit," Riley cried, frantically searching for her stuffed bunny. "Sweetie, we have to go. Daddy's waiting," Ayesha responded, always patient, while settling Ryan in the car. "I'm not going without Mr. Rabbit." Riley stomped her foot, determined. What happened next was etched in Riley's memory. Ayesha, always composed in public, let out a long sigh. For a fraction of a second, her mask of perfection fell. She rested her forehead on the steering wheel and closed her eyes. "5 minutes," she whispered to herself. "I just need 5 minutes." Then, as if a switch had been flipped, she raised her head, smiled at Riley, and said, "Let's find Mr. Rabbit. He must be hiding." Together, they turned the house upside down. The rain grew stronger, the minutes passed, and the game would start soon. Finally, they found the little stuffed animal under Riley's bed. "See? He was just playing hide and seek," Ayesha smiled, with no trace of irritation or rush. Only years later did Riley understand the significance of that moment. Her mother swallowing her stress, choosing to prioritize a child's feelings over punctuality or convenience. "When we got to the stadium, we were late and soaked," Riley continued her speech. "In the photos from that day, my mother appears perfect as always, smiling next to Dad. No one knew she spent 30 minutes looking for a stuffed bunny in the rain, or that she had only 5 minutes to get ready in the stadium bathroom." Riley looked directly at her mother. "No one knew, but I saw. And I began to notice other moments like this." She told about the nights she found Ayesha working late on her laptop after everyone was asleep, or the mornings when she saw her practicing recipes at 5 in the morning, before the house woke up. "There was one specific day when I was 8 years old. We had moved to a new, bigger house in San Francisco. Dad was on a long trip with the team. Ryan had a fever. Cannon was just a baby. I woke up in the middle of the night, thirsty. Riley paused, taking a deep breath, her voice slightly trembling for the first time. I found my mother sitting on the kitchen floor, among boxes not yet unpacked, with Cannon sleeping in her lap. She was checking her phone with one hand and holding a thermometer in the other, monitoring Ryan's temperature, who was sleeping on the couch. There were papers, scattered. Contracts, I think, for her new restaurant. In the audience, Steph put his arm around Ayesha, who now had silent tears streaming down her face. She didn't see me. She was talking to herself, going over everything she needed to do the next day. And then, very quietly, she said, "You can do this, Ayesha. One step at a time." Riley swallowed hard. It was the first time I realized that my mother, who always seemed to have all the answers, who never seemed tired or scared, sometimes needed to remind herself that she was strong enough. When you're 10 years old and your last name is Curry, things get strange, Riley continued, adjusting the microphone. The auditorium was in absolute silence. That was the age when I really began to understand what it meant to be the daughter of who I am. Riley vividly remembered the day this reality hit her with full force. It was the first day of school after summer vacation. She was excited about her new uniform, her backpack full of new supplies, eager to see her friends again and meet her new teacher. "Riley Curry?" called Ms. Dawson during roll call, and then her eyes widened with recognition. "Oh, you're Steph Curry's daughter, aren't you?" Before she could answer, the entire class turned to look at her. Some whispered, others smiled with admiration. It wasn't the first time this had happened, but for some reason, that day, it felt different. At lunchtime, Riley continued her speech. A new girl came up to me. She didn't ask my name or what I liked. The first thing she said was, "Is it true you live in a mansion? Does your dad give you a $1,000 allowance?" Riley paused, remembering the discomfort of that moment. And then came PE class. The teacher chose me first for the basketball team, obviously. "Let's see what Curry's daughter can do," he said, passing me the ball. In the audience, Steph lowered his head, recognizing the weight his success inadvertently placed on his daughter's shoulders. "I had never told anyone, but I hate basketball," Riley confessed, eliciting some soft laughter from the audience. "I'm terrible at it. My passion is swimming. But that day, everyone expected me to be amazing. When I missed the shot, I heard some laughs. Someone muttered, 'I thought she'd be better, being whose daughter she is.'" Riley paused, looking at her own hands for a moment. That day, I went home in silence. My dad was traveling with the team, as happened many times. I found my mother in the kitchen, preparing dinner. She immediately noticed something was wrong. The scene came back vividly in Riley's memory. Ayesha drying her hands on her apron, sitting at the kitchen table, and gently asking what had happened. Riley burst into tears, pouring out all the frustration accumulated during the day. "I didn't ask to be Steph Curry's daughter," she had shouted, immediately regretting her words. Ayesha showed no sign of offense. Instead, she wiped Riley's tears with her thumbs and said, "Come with me." They went up to Riley's room, where Ayesha opened a photo album that the girl had never seen before. "She showed me photos of when she was my age," Riley told the audience. "My mother grew up in Toronto, Canada, the daughter of a Chinese-Jamaican woman and an African-American man. She told me what it was like to be different, how people asked strange questions about her family, how sometimes she didn't know where she fit in." Flipping through the album, Ayesha showed Riley a photo. of herself at 12, holding a trophy from a speech competition. "Do you know why I keep this photo?" Ayesha asked. "Because it was the day I decided that it didn't matter what people thought or expected of me. What mattered was what I expected of myself." Riley remembered how her mother closed the album and held her hands. "Riley, you will never escape the Curry last name. It opens doors, yes, but it also brings expectations. The question is, will you let those expectations define who you are, or will you define yourself?" It was a revelation for Riley. In all her short life, she had never thought that her mother could understand what it was like to live under the weight of others' expectations. "From that day on," Riley continued her speech, "my mother started doing something different. She would send me messages before tests or swimming competitions, and she never said, 'Good luck' or 'You'll do well.' She always said, 'Remember who you are,' and that is more than enough." Riley looked at the audience, finding her mother's eyes. "It took me a while to understand what she meant, but now I know. She was teaching me that my identity wasn't in my results or in what others expected of me. It was in who I chose to be every day." The auditorium remained in absolute silence as Riley continued her story. She took a deep breath, preparing to share a more difficult moment. "Last year, a few weeks after my 11th birthday, we had a fight. The first big fight I remember having with my mother." Riley adjusted the microphone, a bit uncomfortable. Talking about family conflicts in public wasn't easy, but it was an essential part of her story. "It was a Saturday, and we had planned to spend the day together, just the two of us. My mother had promised for weeks. We would go to the museum, then lunch at a restaurant I wanted to try, and end the day with a shopping session." Riley vividly remembered that day. She had woken up early, carefully chosen her outfit, and bounced down the stairs. She found her mother in the kitchen, on the phone, with a worried expression. "Sorry, sweetheart," Ayesha said as she hung up. "We had a problem at the restaurant. The head chef got sick, and we have an important event tonight. I need to go there and sort it out." Riley's face instantly crumbled. "But you promised. Today was our day." "I know, and I'm sorry. Can we reschedule for next weekend? Or maybe your dad could take you." "He's traveling, you know that," Riley replied, her voice getting louder. "You always do this. You always break your promises to me." The accusation hung in the air between them like something alive and pulsating. It was unfair, and Riley knew it even in that moment, but the words had already escaped. "That's not true, Riley," Ayesha responded calmly, but Riley could see the hurt in her eyes. "Yes, it is. Your work always comes first. The restaurant, the books, the interviews. There's always something more important than your family." Ayesha took a deep breath, clearly trying to maintain her composure. "Riley Elizabeth Curry, that's enough. You know very well that nothing is more important to me than you three." "Then prove it," Riley shouted, tears streaming down her face. "Prove that we're more important." "I don't need to prove anything," Ayesha responded, her voice now firm. "Everything I do, every minute I work, is for you. One day you'll understand that." "No, I won't understand." Riley stomped her foot. "You don't even care how I feel. You only care about your career and what people think of you." It was at this moment that something unexpected happened. Instead of responding more firmly or sending Riley to her room, Ayesha simply left the kitchen. In absolute silence. Riley was stunned. Her mother, always ready with answers, always wanting to resolve conflicts, had simply withdrawn from the discussion. I stood there, not knowing what to do. Riley continued in her speech. Then I went up to my room and slammed the door. I spent the entire morning there, furious, hurt, and convinced I was right. The silence that followed that fight was one of the most difficult moments in Riley's life. She expected her mother to come to her room, knock on the door, try to talk. But that didn't happen. Around noon, I decided to come down, Riley told the audience. I was still angry, but I was also hungry and curious to see what my mother was doing. To her surprise, the house was empty. On the kitchen counter was a simple note. Went to the restaurant. Back in the afternoon. There are sandwiches in the fridge. Love you, Mom. Those last two words, love you, seemed like a silent accusation to Riley. How could her mother still write that after the way she had behaved? I spent the rest of the day feeling worse and worse, Riley continued. When I heard the car parking, I ran back to my room, pretending not to be interested. But I left the door slightly ajar. Riley watched her mother slowly climb the stairs, looking exhausted. Ayesha paused briefly in front of Riley's door, raised her hand as if to knock, but then let it fall and went to her own room. That night, at dinner time, we both came down as if nothing had happened. We talked about trivial things. I helped set the table. My mother asked about my homework. It was as if our fight had never occurred. Riley paused, feeling emotion build in her throat. This silence confused me. I expected to be punished, lose privileges, hear a sermon. But none of that happened. And somehow, that was worse. 3 days passed in that strange limbo. Life followed its normal course, but there was an invisible barrier between mother and daughter. Until, the following Wednesday, Riley found something on her bed when she returned from school. It was an envelope with my name, she explained. Inside were 2 tickets to the musical Hamilton, which I was desperate to see, and a card that simply said, "For Riley, because you are more important. Always. With love, Mom." Riley stared at that card for a long time, tears silently flowing. It wasn't an apology. Her mother wasn't admitting she was wrong to go to work. It was something much deeper. It was an affirmation of the unconditional love that existed between them, even in moments of conflict. That night, I went to her room, Riley continued. She was sitting on the bed, answering emails. When I entered, she immediately put the laptop aside. Riley stood at the door, not knowing what to say. Finally, she gathered her courage and asked, "Why weren't you angry with me?" Ayesha gave a small smile. "Angry with you for expressing your feelings? Even if, inappropriately, you were saying you missed me. How could I be angry about that? But I said horrible things." "You did," Ayesha agreed, "and that hurt me. But Riley, you're growing up. You're learning to deal with complicated emotions. Part of my job as your mother is to give you space for that." It was at this moment that Riley understood something profound about her mother. The silence didn't mean indifference. It meant respect. Ayesha was giving Riley the space to process her own feelings, to understand the consequences of her words. That conflict, Riley told the audience, taught me more about my mother than 1,000 conversations. I learned that sometimes silence is the deepest form of love, and that even when I didn't deserve it, her love for me never wavered. There are conversations that change everything, Riley continued, her gaze softening with the memory. For me, that conversation happened 4 months ago, on a Sunday night, in my mother's bedroom. The day had been ordinary: church in the morning, family lunch, a quiet afternoon at home. Riley had spent hours in her room, scrolling through social media, when she came across yet another comment about her family. "I've become an expert at ignoring what they say about us online," Riley explained to the audience. "Normally, I slide my finger and move on. But that night, I saw something that really hurt me." It was a comparison between her and her mother at 12 years old. Photos side by side, with comments analyzing their features, determining who was prettier, debating whether Riley had inherited the right genes or not. "I kept looking at those photos for a long time," Riley said, her voice getting lower, comparing every detail. "My nose, my eyes, my hair. It was as if my body wasn't mine, but something public to be dissected." That night, Riley couldn't sleep. At 11:30, she got up from her bed and, without thinking much, went to her parents' room. Her father was away, at a game in Chicago. She knocked softly on the door. "Come in," Ayesha's voice sounded from the other side. Riley found her mother in bed, surrounded by papers, drafts of a new cookbook. Ayesha immediately pushed all the work aside when she saw her daughter's expression. "What is it, my love?" Riley sat on the edge of the bed, unsure how to begin. "Mom, do you think I'm pretty?" The question hung in the air between them. Ayesha studied her daughter's face for a long moment, not answering immediately, which made Riley even more nervous. "Come here," Ayesha finally said, making room on the bed. Riley lay down beside her mother, as she did when she was little. "Now, tell me what's really going on." And Riley told everything about the comments, the comparisons, how she felt being constantly observed and judged. The hardest part, Riley told the audience, recalling that conversation, is that I started to believe them. I started looking in the mirror and seeing only flaws. And that night, I desperately needed my mother to tell me I was beautiful. But Ayesha didn't do that, at least not immediately. Instead, she held Riley's hands and said, "I'm going to tell you something I've never told anyone." Ayesha revealed that, for years, she had struggled with insecurities about her own appearance. How she felt inadequate the first times she appeared at public events with Steph. How she read online comments that made her question everything about herself. "I spent years trying to fit into some impossible mold," Ayesha confessed, "until I realized I was teaching you, through my example, that appearance was what mattered. And that broke me inside." Riley remembered how her mother had held her face between her hands that night. "So, I'm going to tell you something now, Riley, and I want you to listen carefully. You are not beautiful." The auditorium audience let out a slight murmur of surprise, and Riley smiled for the first time during her speech. "That was my reaction too," she said. "I was shocked. But then my mother continued, 'You are not beautiful because beauty is superficial, temporary, and defined by others. You are magnificent. You are powerful. You have your father's strength, my determination, your grandparents' creativity, and something entirely your own that no one else in the world possesses.'" Riley's eyes filled with tears as she repeated her mother's words. "Your value isn't in your face or your body, Riley. It's in your mind that creates incredible stories. In your heart that deeply cares for others. In your courage to be yourself when it would be easier to hide." Ayesha then did something that surprised Riley. She took her phone, opened the front camera, and placed it in front of Riley's face. "Look at you," Ayesha said. "Really look. Not as others see you. Not as social media wants you to see yourself. But as I see you. As your father sees you. As you should see yourself." Riley told the audience how they spent hours talking that night, about beauty and values, about growing up in the spotlight, about the pressure Ayesha also felt to be perfect in everything. As a mother, wife, businesswoman. It was the first time, Riley said, that I saw my mother not as an authority figure or a perfect example, but as a real woman who also had doubts and fears. She told me about her failures that no one knows about nights crying in the bathroom so no one would see, about times she almost gave up on her dreams. Ayesha revealed to Riley how she felt she was constantly balancing spinning plates, fearing the day when one of them would fall. How she was afraid of not being present enough for her children or not giving her marriage the attention it deserved. The truth is that no one has everything under control, Riley, Ayesha confessed. We're all just doing the best we can, day after day. When Riley finally began to yawn, it was past 2 in the morning. Ayesha kissed her forehead and whispered, "You are stronger than you think, smarter than you believe, and more loved than you'll ever know." Riley fell asleep in her mother's room that night, feeling truly heard for the first time in a long time. The next morning, Riley continued her speech, "I woke up, and my mother had already left for an early meeting. But on the pillow beside me, I found a note. Thank you for letting me be your mother. It's the greatest honor of my life." Riley looked at the audience, her eyes briefly meeting Ayesha's. That night changed everything between us. Not because we solved all the problems, or because we never had doubts again, but because, for the first time, we really saw each other. Not the roles we play, but who we really are underneath it all. When you grow up with a famous mother, Riley continued, adjusting the microphone, people assume they know what she's like. They see the interviews, the cooking shows, the Instagram photos. They think they know everything. Riley paused, a small smile forming. But no one sees behind the scenes, the love that happens when the cameras are off. In recent years, Riley had begun to notice subtle patterns in her mother's behavior. Small gestures that would go unnoticed by anyone who wasn't paying attention. "My mother has this habit," Riley explained. "Before each of my father's important games, she discreetly puts a note in his jacket pocket. He only discovers it during warm-up. I've never seen her do this. I only realized one day when Dad casually mentioned it, as if it were the most normal thing in the world." Another observation. Every Friday, no matter how busy she was, Ayesha prepared chocolate cookies for the children's lunch boxes. They weren't elaborate cookies like the ones that appeared in her cookbooks. They were simple, sometimes slightly burnt. But they were always there. "To my friends, this might seem silly," Riley said. "But to me, it means that even on the most chaotic days, when she has meetings, recordings, or travels, my mother thinks of us. It's her silent way of saying, 'I'm here.'" Riley told about the special drawer Ayesha kept in her office, where she stored every drawing, letter, and school project from her children. She didn't just keep them, she meticulously organized them in labeled folders. "Once, I walked in without knocking and found her looking at a drawing I made in Tuyu, preschool," Riley recalled. "It was terrible. A smudge that was supposedly our family. She was smiling at that paper as if it were a masterpiece." Another revealing moment happened during a family trip to Hawaii when Riley was 9. The family was in the ocean, and an unexpectedly strong wave knocked Riley down. For a terrifying instant, she lost her sense of direction underwater. Then, she felt strong hands pulling her to the surface. "It was my mother," Riley said. "She was at least 10 meters away when the wave hit me. To this day, I don't know how she got to me so quickly. When I asked later, she just shrugged and said, Mothers always know. But what impressed Riley most over the years was realizing how her mother defended her, even when she wasn't present to see it. Last year, I overheard a conversation, Riley told the audience. A person at an event asked my mother why she allowed me to wear certain clothes or post certain things on social media. They suggested that perhaps my mother should have more control over my public image. Ayesha's response was firm and immediate. Riley is not an extension of my brand or her father's career. She is a complete person, with the right to discover who she is. My job is not to control her, but to guide her as she finds her own voice. The audience murmured in approval, and Riley saw her mother wiping silent tears in the front row. I never told her I heard that, Riley confessed, but I carry those words with me every day. Riley also mentioned the difficult moments, the nights when Ayesha came home late from engagements, visibly exhausted, but still passed by each child's room for a goodnight kiss, even if they were already asleep. There was one specific night, Riley recalled. I was 10 and had a high fever. My mother had an important event, the launch of her second restaurant. She was getting ready when I started feeling ill. Without hesitation, Ayesha took off her gala dress, put on sweatpants, and stayed by Riley's bedside all night, placing cold compresses on her forehead and checking her temperature every hour. The next day, I saw in the news that the event had been a great success. They sent photos of her wearing the dress she had taken off. Archive photos, obviously. No one who read those articles had any idea that, in reality, she spent the whole night holding my hair back while I vomited. Riley looked directly at her mother, whose makeup was already beginning to smudge with tears. The world sees Ayesha Curry, the celebrity. I see my mother, who cancels engagements without thinking twice when I need her, who never made me feel that her work was more important than me, even when I unfairly accused her of that. 3 weeks ago, Riley continued, Ms. Bennett gave us an assignment. We were supposed to write an essay about someone we admire. Riley explained how she initially thought about writing about some historical figure or a famous athlete. It seemed more academic, more mature. I spent days researching, taking notes, trying to find the perfect person to write about, she said. But nothing felt right. Then, the night before the deadline, Riley sat at her desk and began writing about her mother. The words flowed easily, page after page of memories, observations, and feelings she had never articulated before. When I finished, it was late at night. I reread what I had written and panicked, Riley confessed. It was too personal, too vulnerable. What if my classmates laughed? What if the teacher thought it was silly to write about my own mother? In an impulse of insecurity, Riley crumpled the pages and threw them in the trash. She quickly wrote a generic essay about Marie Curie, printed it, and went to bed, trying to ignore the knot in her throat. The next day, she handed in the essay about Curie and tried to forget about that other, honest and raw one she had discarded. 3 days later, Riley continued, I came home from school and found something strange on my bed. The crumpled pages of my original essay, carefully smoothed out and stapled. Riley looked at the audience with watery eyes. My first reaction was anger. Who had gone through my trash? Who had read something so personal without my permission? She went downstairs, ready to confront whoever it was. She found her mother in the kitchen, preparing dinner as if nothing had happened. Did you take something from my trash? Riley asked bluntly. Ayesha turned around, drying her hands on her apron. The cleaning crew came yesterday. I was just checking if they hadn't thrown away anything important. And you read it? Riley insisted, her voice trembling slightly. "I did," Ayesha admitted without hesitation. "And I'm sorry if that invaded your privacy, but I'm not sorry I read it." Riley remembered how she stood in silence, not knowing how to react. "Why did you throw it away?" Ayesha asked softly. "Because it's embarrassing," Riley muttered. "No one my age writes like that. About their mother. They'll think I'm a child." Ayesha came closer and placed her hands on her daughter's shoulders. "Riley, wanting to seem mature is natural at your age. But you know what's really mature? Being honest about your feelings, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard." She then said something Riley would never forget. "Some of the strongest people I know are those who aren't afraid to show how much they love. They're the ones who have the courage to be vulnerable when it would be easier to hide behind indifference." "But what if they laugh?" Riley asked, her voice small. "Then they haven't yet learned one of the most important lessons in life," Ayesha replied. "That there is no greater strength than love, and there is nothing more courageous than showing it." The next day, Riley asked Ms. Bennett for permission to redo her essay. She handed in the once crumpled pages, now carefully recopied on clean paper. A week later, Riley told the audience, "Ms. Bennett called me after class. She had tears in her eyes when she told me my essay was one of the most beautiful things she had ever read. And then she asked if I would like to adapt it for the Mother's Day speech." Riley stopped, looking at the folded paper in her hands, the one she hadn't used throughout her speech. "I spent weeks working on this speech. I rewrote it countless times, trying to make it perfect. I rehearsed it in front of the mirror, timing each pause." She smiled. "And then, this morning, I decided I wouldn't use it." She unfolded the paper and showed it to the audience. "Because the paper my mother saved from the trash contained something that no rehearsed speech could capture. The raw, imperfect, and complete truth about how I feel." Riley looked at Ayesha, who was now openly crying, with Steph holding her hand. "The truth that took me 12 years to have the courage to say out loud." "This morning," Riley continued, "I got up early. Everyone was still asleep, and the house was quiet." She stood still for a moment, as if reliving those tranquil hours before dawn. "I sat on the edge of my bed, looking at the speech I had prepared. Carefully chosen words, perfectly structured sentences. A speech any teacher would love." Riley took a deep breath. "And then I realized I was doing it again. Trying to be perfect. Trying to meet expectations. Trying to be who I thought I should be, instead of simply being who I am." She got up and walked to the full-length mirror in her room. The girl who stared back seemed simultaneously older and younger than her 12 years, a child on the threshold of adolescence, with eyes that had already seen more of the world than many adults. "I looked at myself for a long time," Riley said, "not analyzing my appearance as I used to do, but really seeing myself. And I asked myself, who are you, Riley Curry? Not Steph and Ayesha's daughter, not the girl in social media photos, but you, when no one is looking." The answer didn't come easily. Riley realized that, for a long time, she had defined herself through others' eyes. The well-behaved daughter, the exemplary student, the responsible older sister, the girl who never caused trouble. "I realized that, even at 12 years old, I had already built a public version of myself," she confessed to the audience. "A version that always smiled, never showed insecurity, seemed to have everything under control." This made her think about her mother, about how Ayesha also navigated between her public persona and her true self. about how exhausting it must be to maintain that image of perfection the world expected. Looking at my reflection, I saw my mother's eyes staring back at me, Riley said softly. And I wondered how many times she too stood before the mirror, trying to reconcile who she is with who the world expects her to be. It was at that moment that Riley made a decision. She took the carefully prepared speech and put it in the drawer. She wouldn't use notes, wouldn't follow a script. For the first time, she would speak directly from the heart. I decided that today wouldn't be about creating another perfect moment for social media, she explained. It would be about truth, about showing that girl in the mirror that she has permission to be authentic, to be imperfect, to be real. Riley smiled shyly at the audience. Because that's what my mother silently taught me all these years, that our true strength isn't in the perfection we show the world, but in the authenticity we have the courage to live. The auditorium was in absolute silence as Riley continued. She had completely abandoned any pretense of following a script, her words flowing naturally, laden with raw emotion. I think that's why I'm here now, without my notes, she said, her voice slightly trembling. Because after 12 years of watching my mother, I learned that the most important truths are those we cannot rehearse. Riley paused, her eyes meeting Ayesha's in the front row. For a moment, it seemed that mother and daughter were having a silent conversation, visible only to them. My mother never wanted to be famous, Riley continued, surprising many in the audience. She wanted to cook. She wanted to create. She wanted to make people feel loved through food. Fame came as a side effect, and she had to learn to navigate it while still figuring out who she was, as a person, as a wife, as a mother. Riley remembered a conversation she had overhead between her parents, late at night, when they thought the children were asleep. Ayesha expressed concern about how the growing media attention would affect the children. I don't want them to grow up thinking they need to be perfect all the time, she had said. I don't want them to feel like they're always being watched, judged. I grew up knowing there were always eyes on our family, Riley confessed. And for a long time, that made me believe I needed to be some kind of model child. Never break rules. Never show weakness. Always smile for the cameras. Her voice began to falter, and for the first time throughout her speech, Riley felt tears forming not just in her eyes, but freely flowing down her cheeks. What I didn't know, she continued, without trying to hide the crying, is how much this cost my mother. How much she fought to protect us from that pressure. The battles she fought behind the scenes so we could have moments of normalcy. Riley told about the times Ayesha refused interviews and advertising campaigns that wanted to include the children. How she established clear boundaries about what could be shared on social media. How she insisted on checking any content that included her children before it was published. She gave up many professional opportunities, Riley revealed, because she put our privacy and our well-being first. And she did it so quietly that we didn't even notice the sacrifice. The tears were coming faster now, and Riley made no effort to contain them. In the front row, Ayesha was also openly crying, with Steph firmly holding her hand. The world sees my mother as someone who has it all, Riley said between sobs. A successful career, a beautiful family, a happy marriage. What they don't see are the nights she cries from exhaustion. The moments of doubt when she wonders if she's doing enough, being enough. The times she questions every decision, fearing she's failing us somehow. Riley stopped, trying to regain her composure, but the tears kept falling. A teacher approached the stage, offering a handkerchief. which Riley accepted with a nod of gratitude. "I'm sorry," she said, wiping her face. "I promised myself I wouldn't cry today." A small smile crossed her wet face. "Another promise I break, as you can see." There was a murmur of support and some gentle laughter from the audience. "But perhaps it's appropriate," Riley continued, "because what I'm trying to say is that my mother taught me that we don't need to be perfect, that it's okay to break sometimes, that our imperfections, our vulnerabilities, are what make us human." Riley looked directly at her mother. "The truth I want to reveal today is that my mother never tried to be perfect. She tried to be authentic. And that's the most valuable lesson she could give me." Tears now flowed freely, both on stage and in the audience. "Mom," Riley said, her voice choked with emotion, "thank you for showing me that strength isn't never falling. It's getting up every time we fall. Thank you for teaching me that vulnerability isn't weakness. It's the purest form of courage." Riley took a deep breath, her shoulders trembling with the effort of containing her sobs. "Thank you for loving me not despite my imperfections, but with them. And thank you for showing me every day that true love doesn't need spotlights to shine." When Riley finally descended from the stage, the entire auditorium was on its feet. It wasn't a conscious decision. People simply stood up, moved by the raw authenticity they had just witnessed. But Riley barely noticed the applause. Her eyes were fixed on just one person. Ayesha rose from the front row, arms open. Riley ran to her, as she did when she was little. Mother and daughter embraced for a long time, their tears mingling, no words necessary. When they finally separated, Ayesha held Riley's face between her hands, looking deeply into her eyes. "I am so proud of you," she whispered. So proud." The rest of the event continued. Other presentations, final acknowledgments, refreshments in the courtyard afterward. But for Riley and Ayesha, something had fundamentally changed. An invisible barrier had fallen between them. Later that day, when the family returned home, Riley found a small package on her bed. Inside was a journal bound in soft leather, with her initials engraved on the cover. On the first page, in her mother's elegant handwriting, "For Riley, your truths are powerful. Never stop telling them. With all my love, Mom." Riley sat on the edge of the bed, flipping through the blank pages. A new beginning. A space for more truths. A gentle knock on the door made her look up. Ayesha was standing in the doorway, still wearing the navy blue dress from the event. "May I come in?" she asked. Riley nodded, and Ayesha sat beside her on the bed. For a moment, they sat in silence, the physical proximity saying more than words. "How do you feel?" Ayesha finally asked. Riley considered the question. "Light," she answered after a moment. "As if I'd removed a huge weight that I didn't even know I was carrying." Ayesha smiled, running her fingers through her daughter's curls. "That's how truth works. It liberates." "I said things I had never said before," Riley confessed. "Some that I didn't even know I felt until they were coming out of my mouth." "Sometimes our deepest truths are those we keep hidden even from ourselves," Ayesha replied. It was brave to share them. Riley played with the edge of the new journal. "I feel like I exposed you, that I said very personal things." Ayesha shook her head. "You didn't expose me, Riley. You saw me, really saw me, in the way I always hoped someday you might see." She took her daughter's hands in hers. "You know, I spent so much time worrying if I was doing the right thing as a mother, if I was present enough, if you understood why I worked so hard. if I was balancing everything correctly." "And you were," Riley assured. "Not always," Ayesha admitted with a small smile. "I made many mistakes. I still do. But today, you gave me the greatest gift a mother could receive." "What?" Riley asked. "The certainty that you not only heard what I said over the years, but understood what I was trying to teach. That you saw beyond appearances, beyond expectations, beyond the facade. That you perceived the love, even when it was hidden in the details." Riley thought about the thousands of little ways her mother demonstrated love daily, ways that she had only recently begun to truly appreciate. "You know I love you, right?" Riley asked, suddenly worried that perhaps she had never said it enough. Ayesha smiled, fresh tears shining in her eyes. "I always knew, but hearing it today, in front of all those people, it was like hearing it for the first time." They embraced again, harder this time. In the weeks that followed, Riley's speech had unexpected consequences. A video recorded by one of the parents at the event went viral online. Journalists tried to make contact for interviews. Commentators dissected every word. But for the Curry family, the real impact was much more intimate. Ryan, the middle sister, began writing letters to Ayesha, leaving them under her pillow. Small observations, thanks for things that previously went unnoticed. Cannon, still young, became more verbal about his feelings, often declaring, "I love you, Mommy," at random moments throughout the day. Steph, always expressive in his love for the family, found new ways to support Ayesha, not just in the big public moments, but in the small daily battles she had previously faced alone. As for Riley and Ayesha, the change was profound but subtle. Conversations that were once superficial became more meaningful. Silences became comfortable, not tense. The invisible barrier between mother and daughter began to dissolve, revealing two people who could be both mentors and friends to each other. On social media, hashtags like "Truths for My Mothers" emerged, with young people across the country inspired to share their own untold truths. Schools began inviting Riley to speak about authenticity and family relationships. But the real transformation was in the private moments. Like on the night, 3 months after the speech, when Riley silently entered the kitchen at 2 a.m. and found her mother baking cinnamon and orange muffins. "Can't sleep?" Ayesha asked, without surprise. Riley shook her head. "Nightmare." Without further questions, Ayesha handed Riley a bowl and a spoon. "Help me mix?" Side by side, mother and daughter worked in comfortable silence. When the muffins were in the oven, Ayesha began humming softly. That same melody that Riley had mentioned in her speech, the one she sang when she thought no one was listening. This time, however, she knew Riley was there, and she kept singing anyway. This is how truths heal, not in grand dramatic moments, but in the small acts of shared trust, in vulnerabilities freely revealed, in love that no longer needs to hide. Riley smiled at her mother in the soft kitchen light. There were no more secrets between them, no more untold truths, just two people, imperfect and real, finally seeing each other completely. And that was more than enough. It was everything.